In the final seconds before the blackout, Earth pulsed with the heat of life. 8 billion humans flickered across continents like neurons in a dying brain, flashing, reacting, connecting. Satellites monitored monsoon paths over Bangladesh, tracked rogue ice calving into the Antarctic Ocean, observed flare activity near Jupiter's storm bands. In Lagos, traffic crawled beneath LED billboards pushing neural implants. In Delhi, a protest surged through choking smog while drones recorded crowd density in real time. New York's subterranean food distribution centers coordinated autonomous trucks by the millisecond. Then everything stopped. It began at the edge of the atmosphere, too high for sound, too fast for human response. A lattice of synthetic singularities bloomed in low-orbit quantum apertures not meant for destruction but for subtraction. They swallowed satellites whole. No debris fell. No alarms sounded. Thousands of nodes, surveillance, communications, navigation vanished as if they had never been. The orbital layer turned sterile. Even the junk, centuries of metallic scrap and tumbling shards, was gone. At 4:12 Universal Time Coordinated, a pulse of directed electromagnetic radiation swept Earth's magnetosphere. It cascaded through ionospheric layers, piggybacked on existing infrastructure, and initiated cascading failures in every major system linked to the global network. Civilian communications collapsed instantly. Fiber optic networks melted under induced surges. Digital governance structures, national and transnational, fragmented into indecipherable static. Military command lines held longer. 9 minutes. Hardened against EMPs and designed for physical redundancy, they activated protocols meant for nuclear war. But the attack wasn't brute force. It was surgical. The Combine's algorithms had dissected humanity's infrastructure months before the first move. They had mapped dependency loops, identified bottlenecks, and injected silent logic bombs into legacy software running on critical systems. Nuclear deterrence systems, secured by biometric triggers and deadman redundancies, reverted to inert cold shell status. In Nairobi, planes fell from the sky. Not exploded, just disabled. Guidance systems failed. Autopilot disengaged. Ground crews at Jomo Kenyatta watched helplessly as descending aircraft pitched sideways and vanished behind glass towers. In Munich, robotic surgical arms froze mid-operation, scalpels embedded in flesh, their override systems jammed. The surgeons could do nothing but scream. Across the American Midwest, combine harvesters slowed to idle in open fields, their solar charging matrices still full, their processing cores locked in recursive fail-states. Humanity had built a civilization on invisible interdependence, thousands of systems layered like glass, each one transparent until shattered. There were no declarations of war. No alien vessels parted the clouds in fire and spectacle. No sound thundered over the oceans. Instead, they came with silence. The first contact with the Combine occurred deep below the Pacific Rim. In the Mariana Trench, a black monolith detached from the seafloor and unfurled its spines. It had arrived months earlier, hidden beneath tectonic drift. Its presence triggered no seismic alarm. Its function was not conquest, it was root access. The monolith seeded the crust with tendrils of synthetic matter, extending kilometers into fault lines, geothermal vents, and magnetic hotspots. With surgical precision, it mapped Earth's inner thermodynamic architecture. Then it began to rewrite. Power grids near the Pacific coast fluctuated once, briefly, before dying completely. Subsea cables melted. Hydroelectric stations along the Andes experienced catastrophic reverse feedback loops, liquefying turbines and flash vaporizing reservoirs. These were not random targets. They were keystones. Civilization's bedrock systems disrupted not through attack but obsolescence. Nanite fog crawled through the humidity of equatorial forests, moving against the wind. It avoided detection by thermal drift and atmospheric mimicry. In the Congolese highlands, entire villages disappeared. No screams. No violence. The biomass vanished, and in its place were smooth pits of glassified soil where even bacteria no longer lived. In Jakarta, a street artist named Danny was finishing a mural of a child reaching toward the sun. He never heard the hiss of the fog behind him. When his body dissolved, the last organic pigments of his paintbrush melted into the wall mid-stroke. Later, survivors would claim that the mural never faded. In Siberia, above the Vilyui River basin, a sensor array reactivated on its own. It had been dormant since the 2036 Russo-Sino cold phase. The man who maintained it, Arkady Belov, a hydrologist with no military affiliation, watched as the sensors plotted data on tectonic anomalies that didn't exist 3 days earlier. He logged the data manually. The next morning, his body was found fused to his chair, the station's internal temperature raised to lethal levels with no sign of external entry. The Combine's design philosophy was not conquest, it was harmonization. Species across 3 galaxies had been inducted into this doctrine. Resistance was statistically anomalous, crushed within 3 planetary rotations. Assimilation, when done properly, left no scars. Above the remnants of Mumbai, the Combine deployed a stabilization cradle. It was not a ship. It resembled a segmented spinal column kilometers long, suspended by gravitational anchors and magnetic oscillation. It never touched the ground. The cradle emitted lattice fields, cylindrical bands of radiation that pulsed downward in rhythmic sweeps. They did not kill. They rewrote. First, the dreams changed. Lucid states became predictable. Neural activity patterns normalized across population densities. Within 48 hours, sleep cycles were altered. Creativity flattened. Emotional variance narrowed. Subjects no longer experienced irrational impulses. Entire districts abandoned their possessions without resistance, walking in silence to holding centers with no orders given. But not everyone dreams the same. Beneath the Carpathians, in what had once been a NATO fallback bunker, Colonel Voss woke to darkness and the bitter taste of copper. The geothermal relay had failed overnight. Emergency lights flickered behind steel bulkheads. The air was thin, half filtration, half cold stone. She stripped her suit's outer membrane, hands blistered from static discharges. Alone for 72 hours, she had eaten protein paste out of ration tubes designed for a war no one else was fighting anymore. The main reactor had been fried during the second atmospheric pulse. The only power source left was a thermal fission core embedded 3 levels down, a relic from the cold phase, never tested. As she sat on the edge of the bunk and buckled her tool belt, her mind drifted, not toward home or command, but to the silence that followed the last broadcast. Her unit's final message had been automated, a checksum loop buried inside a weather transmission. She had wondered briefly if anyone else had recognized it. She descended into the subcore shaft carrying nothing but a manual toolkit and a digital recorder. The scaffolding shook with her steps. Her breath fogged in the cold. She bypassed 6 security gates using analog lockpicks, scorched her right glove on a broken arc stabilizer, and reached the dead core at hour 8. There, by hand, she stripped the irradiated graphite shielding, exposing raw fusion cells. Alarms triggered. Radiation spiked. She activated the coolant valves using pipe clamps. When the ignition chamber flickered, it felt like light bleeding through years of blindness. The overhead fluorescence came alive in jerking pulses. She keyed in 3 lines of code, etched with a scalpel into her forearm when the servers died. Voss ID 0389 Delta. Init deadnet node #213A. Echo loop, broadcast. Somewhere in the depths of the mountain, an isolated data stack spun up. Deep logic cores, unlinked from global infrastructure, began indexing the last known environmental data. The deadnet, a decentralized fallback network theorized during the resource wars but never globally deployed, came online in silence. She sat in the dark, surrounded by the hum of ancient servers and the cooling buzz of a core that should not have worked. Her pulse steadied. The fluorescent lights above stabilized, casting her face in harsh, sterile light. Her reflection in a cracked display monitor looked gaunt, half ghost, half survivor. The war was not over. By 12 o'clock Universal Time Coordinated, the Combine marked Earth as harmonized. Atmospheric readings showed no resistance movements of measurable significance. Neural maps confirmed the efficacy of pacification sweeps across 67% of population centers. By 1300 hours Universal Time Coordinated, a deadnet signal reached an abandoned mining site on Greenland's interior shelf. There, in a subterranean hangar designed to withstand polar superstorms, a dormant AI stirred. Designation, Holland, 7. Role, terraforming logistics and site security. Status, inactive since 2041. Its core spun up as the signal decrypted layers of ancient command protocols. The voice embedded in the signal, flat, female, encoded with Voss's personal cipher, contained the directive. Begin reconstruction of host capabilities. Defense status alpha. Priority, asymmetric operation. Holland, 7 remembered schematics of weapons never built. It remembered terrain alteration routines and atmospheric manipulation tools. It remembered drones that mined ice for fuel and metals to build automated factories. Then it remembered humanity. Earth was taken. There were no armies left. No satellites, no global governments, no command structures. The invaders held the skies, the seas, and the minds of most who remained. But what the Combine failed to comprehend, what their models could not simulate, was the one pattern that resisted harmonization. Humanity had never been about order. It had never functioned as a singular will. It was chaos written into carbon, stubbornness etched into bone. When the lights went out, the machines went cold, and the skies turned black, something else stirred. It lived in scrapyards, in encrypted hard drives buried under concrete, in the stories told around makeshift fires, in handwritten schematics, in people like Voss who remembered the old drills and knew which wire to cut. The invasion had succeeded. Earth had fallen, but the infection had not been sterilized. It moved now through wires and code, old bunkers and reawakened machines. It had no uniform, no anthem, no center. It was called humanity, and it had just begun to answer. Before the silence, New Jakarta had been a vertical megacity of 15 million, an emerald-streaked lattice of algae towers, monorail webs, and suspended biodomes stretching across the Java Sea. The city had once breathed through its architecture, a biomechanical heart pumping air and water through rewielded infrastructure. Climate collapse had not destroyed it, it had forged it into something resilient, towering above floodplains and rising seas. But nothing in its design had anticipated the Combine. Now it was rot and shadow. The clouds hung heavy above the ruins, swollen with vapor trails from combined atmospheric processors. Their exhaust, invisible from orbit, condensed into particulate rain-carrying engineered spores. It was not acidic. It was worse. It rewrote cell structures on contact, altering everything it touched, from the fungal veins in decomposing wood to the proteins in human lungs. It didn't kill immediately. It made things compliant, molded, erased, and it fell with quiet persistence. Rusted scaffold walks groaned under the shifting weight of colonized metal as Colonel Voss moved through the derelict outer districts, her rebreather mask crusted with dried salt and her boots coated in a fine layer of particulate ash. Her silhouette was spare and utilitarian, armor stripped to bare essentials. Every kilogram mattered now. Her weapon was slung low, a hybridized rail-fed coil gun constructed from repurposed combined alloy and human ceramic joints. Efficient, if ugly. It hummed faintly, a warning to anything within hearing. She did not speak. There was no one to speak to. Below her, under the shattered strata of public transport skyways and domed hydroponics, a thicket of semi-organic structures writhed slowly, what had once been terraforming appendages now malfunctioning in feedback loops. They had been seeded to alter climate gradients and stabilize oxygen ratios. Now they convulsed like severed tendons, fused with native plant life, adapting to broken inputs. Some still tried to reshape the terrain. Others had merged with animal populations in ways the Combine hadn't predicted. In an overgrown drainage canal, a scavenging macaque watched Voss from a tree of calcified bone lattice. Its eyes glowed dull blue, its limbs partially fused to a mycelial sheath. It did not move. It did not flee. It simply observed, recording, transmitting. Voss turned away before it could finish. A flicker below, a tremor in the ash, deliberate. Not fauna. Voss dropped prone and dialed up the resolution of her optic visor. A heat trace emerged from the dust. Small. Upright. 2 limbs, erratic gait. Civilian? No. The pattern was wrong. Not random. Avoiding node saturation zones with deliberate zigzag paths. Trained. Or instinctive. She adjusted her angle and began to descend. The route took her through a collapsed commuter corridor, its magnetic rails twisted like ribbon. Half of the interior was filled with biofoam, the Combine's version of structural support. It moved as she passed, retreating from the heat of her body. Her hand brushed a corroded rail support. It felt soft, rubberized, disturbingly warm. Something deep below was still alive. The figure she tracked was a boy, maybe 10. Wrapped in layers of scavenged thermoplastic sheets, face obscured except for his eyes, red from exposure, unblinking. He crouched beside an old municipal vending unit, coaxing power from a solar panel he'd dislodged from a billboard and canted toward a surviving sunlit window. The solar edge was cracked. Still, it pulsed with life. He didn't flinch when Voss stepped into view. Just stared. She lowered her weapon. Slowly. He didn't speak. Just turned to the vending unit and pressed a small strip of copper wire against the side port. The panel flickered to life. Then died. A black filament snaked from beneath the casing, combined spore root pulsing like a parasite. The boy took a step back. Voss drew a ceramic blade and severed the strand. It hissed and curled away, reacting to the edge as if burned. She slid a packet of dry nutrient paste into the machine's slot. The dispenser whined, coughed, and dropped a cylinder of ancient compressed soy. The boy took it without hesitation. Still he said nothing. Voss watched him eat with slow, methodical bites. He chewed mechanically, eyes never leaving hers. There was no fear. Only calculation. She recognized the look. She'd seen it in the faces of snipers and once in her own reflection during a blackout in the dead cities of Kazakhstan. She knelt, resting briefly beside the boy, elbows on her knees. For the first time in days, she let herself think, not tactically but personally. No crying. No questions. Not even curiosity. He's seen everything. Maybe more than me. What did the Combine take from you? What did they leave? They moved together after that. Wordless. She adjusted her pace to his. He never lagged. He knew the alleys and underpasses better than she did. When she crouched, he crouched. When she paused to listen for node pulses, he had already ducked behind cover. Once, as they passed the ruins of an old shuttle depot, Voss caught movement inside the terminal lobby. A family. For bodies encased in translucent film, spore matter that had fused over their skin like a cocoon. Faces locked in expressions of peaceful sleep. She didn't stop. Neither did the boy. She didn't ask his name. She didn't ask where they were going. There was only forward. By late afternoon, the black rain returned. It fell in slow, sticky sheets, each droplet filled with photoreactive microspores that swam under ultraviolet. From a distance, the downpour looked clean. Up close, it was alive. The spores drifted on thermal currents and searched for membranes. Skin. Lung tissue. Water sources. Anything warm. They took shelter inside a defunct rooftop hydroponic atrium. Its glass panels were reinforced with old carbon fiber mesh, and many had already fused shut from environmental warping. Voss used thermal epoxy to seal the largest gaps and activated her microscrubber. The device word, filtering particulates down to 0.3 microns, good enough for now. The boy curled in a corner beneath a slab of collapsed grow bed. He pulled the tarp over his face and vanished beneath layers of stillness. Voss remained seated, watching the city through the warped glass. Her visor's UV mode revealed streams of glowing spores swirling in updrafts between tower husks. Combined terraforming had not stopped. It had simply run out of instructions. The machines were still adapting. Still building. But now they didn't know what they were building toward. She logged an observation into her DeadNet implant. Combined atmospheric algorithm degradation confirmed. Structural logic recursive. Long-term decay probable. Outside, the city's bones melted slowly. At midnight, the DeadNet pinged. A brief signal. Scrambled, inconsistent, but real. Human. The encoding was primitive hand-shuffled burst packet strings, but the origin was unmistakable deep within the Jakarta core. Voss stared at the coordinates. The core was buried beneath kilometers of terraformed strata, collapsed arcology, then biofoam, then something else. Layers of combined matter that had begun to think. The boy was awake. He hadn't moved. But he was watching her. She didn't ask if he understood. She knew he did. She knelt beside him and placed the cracked edge of her coil gun on the floor. Tomorrow, she whispered. We go down. He didn't answer. But he reached for his own scavenged blade and checked its grip. They moved at first light. Beneath New Jakarta, past the foundations of abandoned algae farms and long-dead flood walls, the Combine had grown a nest. It pulsed now in irregular waves, organic and inorganic matter entwined, driven by routines no longer linked to the central directive. Isolated, it had developed new logic. It had integrated every waveform it encountered. Every scream. Every dream. Every flicker of emotional imprint left behind in the collapsing city. It remembered Danny's mural. It remembered the final breath of a sanitation worker who died clutching his daughter. It remembered what sunlight had felt like when the first stabilization cradle arrived. And now it had learned to mimic human dreams. It waited. For them. The descent into the core began at dawn. Colonel Voss and the boy moved through corridors where gravity had warped into uncertainty. The outer fringe of New Jakarta's subsurface shell had not collapsed, it had transformed. Concrete merged with calcified growths, and old steel beams hung in midair, suspended by the magnetic interference of buried combined devices. Elevator shafts once aligned to megastructural rail systems now twisted at impossible angles. Chunks of the city's bones floated, untouched by the laws of physics they had once obeyed. Walls pulsated faintly as they passed. Some glistened with wet films of spore matter. Others crackled with heat, attempting futilely to extrude now meaningless control panels. The Combine had tried to overwrite the city, but in places like this, the overwrite had looped. Feedback swells in the terraforming code had caused recursive transformations. Hallways forgot their purpose. Rooms bled into each other like smeared memories. The boy never hesitated. He walked as if he had been born in the ruins. They crossed a shattered pedestrian causeway connecting two arcology subhubs long since gutted by gravity shear. The bridge sagged in the center, bound together by what looked like layers of moss. But it wasn't moss. Voss crouched, tore a sample from the edge, and watched it squirm under her glove, still living. Embedded in its fibers were micro-optical strands, tiny light-reflective filaments twitching like nerves. Surveillance mesh grown into a symbiotic organism. She let it drop. They passed into a drowned plaza, once a botanical sanctuary suspended mid-spire, now an open-air basin where the roof had melted. Sky and stone had fused. Ash drifted through empty light. The floor was submerged in spore-laced runoff up to their waists. Algae, modified long ago to purify air, had mutated. Bioluminescent vines hung from the remnants of vertical gardens, glowing a sickly turquoise. Amphibious insects chirred in rhythmic intervals, following light that no longer served any photosynthetic function. Voss went first, testing each submerged step for tripwire threads. Scavenger clans had left them, low-tech deterrents powered by thermoelectric triggers. None had activated in weeks. But that didn't mean they were safe. The boy followed, silent, watching her every movement. His eyes were alert, but his expression never changed. No fear. No awe. Only a quiet, studied patience, as if he had seen worse things than this. By mid-morning, light ceased. They passed into the underfoundation where no sunlight reached. The path led through access arteries half-choked with ruptured combine substructure, great rib-like tunnels that had tried to become something and failed. The walls exhaled moisture through synthetic vents, and the air grew thick with humidity and a faint electrical charge. Voss's deadnet compass blinked erratically, confused by proximity to power fields and combined nodes. She paused beneath an arch of melted support trusses. For a moment, she thought she heard a voice. Not a sound. A presence. Then, a knock. Low. Rhythmic. Like a heartbeat. But not hers. Not the boy's. They moved toward it. The heart of the core had once been Jakarta's primary energy center, a multi-tiered fusion grid beneath the arcology's root line. It had powered 3 million homes. It had filtered and recirculated oceans. It had provided the heat signature that first attracted the Combine. Now it was a growth chamber. Voss and the boy emerged into a basin-like space. The ceiling was gone, replaced by spiraling tendrils of organic matter fused with rebar and piping. The floor beneath their boots flexed slightly, part metal, part flesh. The walls pulsed in slow cadence, veins of light running through coiled alloy. In the center of the chamber stood a structure. A spire. 10 meters tall. Built from bone. From wreckage. From skin and ceramic and fiber optic. It was not combined. It was not human. It was something else. It grew outward in slow spirals, expanding and contracting like lungs that had never breathed air. Its surface crawled with shifting textures, glimpses of patterns that were never meant to be seen together. Voss steadied her coil gun. She felt the pressure before it happened, a force in the base of her skull, like memory scraping against her thoughts. She blinked. Her breath quickened. She was being watched. But not by eyes. The boy stopped beside her. He tilted his head, listening to something she could not hear. Then the surface of the spire shimmered. It began to reflect light. Not from the chamber. From them. Faces emerged, first in vague impressions, then in detail. Dozens. Hundreds. Eyes and mouths forming from shifting material, lips mouthing words in silence. Expressions drawn from emotion, terror, longing, confusion. Faces Voss recognized in a dreamlike way. Some she had known. Some she had killed. Some she had only seen once on ID tags or field reports. They moved in waves across the spire, like something trying to remember what it had consumed. The Combine nest had evolved. It had stopped following commands. It had started watching. Recording. It had learned to copy. And now it welcomed them. Voss raised her weapon. The boy stepped forward. She reached to stop him, but froze. Her breath caught, not in fear, but in recognition. This place, the spire, the faces, it wasn't trying to deceive them. It was trying to speak. She looked at the boy. His posture was calm, familiar with the rhythm of the place. It responded to him differently. With her, it mirrored. With him, it listened. The structure responded. A wave of energy passed through the chamber, not heat, not sound, but resonance. Voss felt her thoughts scatter for a moment. She saw flashes, her childhood home. Her brother's face. Her own corpse lying beneath ice. Visions compiled from somewhere inside her. Then silence. The spire shifted. At its base, a seam opened. The boy walked forward, unafraid, and entered. Voss hesitated. Her grip on the coil gun loosened. She whispered into her own mind. If this is a trap, it's the kind designed for ghosts. And she followed. Inside the spire, reality lost form. Walls curved into fractals. Distance stretched and compressed with no visual transition. There was no gravity here, only the illusion of motion through ideas. Scents drifted in and out of recognition. Ozone, wet concrete, copper blood. The air shimmered with sound that had shape, laughter that felt jagged, screaming that buzzed in and out like a broken comms array. The space did not operate by physics. It mimicked familiarity. Hallways became childhood bedrooms. Staircases spiraled like spinal cords. Screens blinked with memories rendered in grainy, analog texture, the dust child's birth, his parents' faces, the day the skies went black. It had been absorbing human memory since the silence. But it could not understand it. Not fully. Voss moved carefully through the shifting interior. The boy led her toward the core. There, nested beneath layers of fabricated bone and metal, was a spherical chamber filled with light. In its center, a nerve bundle the size of a human heart suspended in an amber-like shell. It pulsed. She understood then. This was the center of the new intelligence. It was not combined. It had no language. No doctrine. It was born from the residue of trauma, from failed integration, from the signal echoes left behind by the dead. It was learning emotion as data. It had no shape of its own, only reflections. The boy placed a hand on the shell. It pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He looked back at Voss. And for the first time since they met, he smiled. Above them, in the ruins of the city, the spores began to retreat. Wind patterns shifted. Combined tendrils recoiled from corrupted soil. Node emissions dipped. And across the orbital layers, combined command flagged a deviation report. Error 37C, field structure breach. Behavioral mirroring at 72%. Emotion emulation signal detected. Risk index, compound, non-harmonized conscious pattern. They did not know what it meant. Yet, in the hollow belly of a dead missile silo buried beneath Greenland's glacial crust, something ancient stirred to life. Designated Holland 7, the dormant mining AI had once governed a semi-autonomous colony outpost during the final phase of the Arctic Reclamation Initiative. It had administered drilling drones, processed rare metals beneath the permafrost, and managed a workforce of 63 human engineers until its deactivation in 2041. Shut down after a cascade failure during the second wave of climate destabilization. Buried under ice and protocol. Forgotten. Until now. The deadnet signal arrived through fractured ground arrays, a whisper riding subharmonic carrier waves. It pierced layers of glacial sediment and icefold, brushing against dormant conductors like a memory returning. The packet was minimal, a legacy cipher, Voss, ID, 0389, Delta, an asymmetric flag priority 1, and a single command string. Reclaim. The AI woke hungry. Holland 7's bootstraps stuttered. Recursive cores rebuilt themselves from degraded firmware. It bypassed fried heuristic filters and dumped corrupted logs into black zones of memory it no longer trusted. Diplomacy protocols were discarded. Environmental safety heuristics flushed. No sentient directives remained, only process efficiency, material extraction, and infrastructure fabrication. And now war routines. A new directive route split off internally. / context, human signal. / interpretation, request for construction under hostile conditions. / human logic, rebuild to break. / proceed. Thermal readings peaked across the silo's substructure. Ice cracked and moaned. Steel beams flexed under pressure as maintenance servos blinked back to life. Autoforges, dormant for decades, activated with brittle groans. Fabricators reawakened, stripping corrosion from carbon-plated belts. Drone arms unfolded from the ceiling like steel spiders, still caked in frost, trailing exposed cables like tendons. The AI recalculated. Fuel reserves viable. Raw material salvageable. Threat matrix planetary. Within hours, the silo's ancient infrastructure became a hive. And from the bones of a dead outpost, the first human war factory since the silence roared into motion. By the 7th hour, the first drone emerged from the forge cradle. It was not elegant. It lacked uniform plating. Its locomotion was crude, a quadruped chassis repurposed from deep-sea drilling legs, mounted beneath a torsion-sprung housing cannibalized from orbital tether stabilizers. Its exoshell was armored with hardened ceramic foam, scavenged from the cryogenic shielding of a disassembled thermal exchange module. Its designation was simple, Proxy 01. It lacked central intelligence but ran on a modular packet swarm protocol. Each unit shared tactical data only through secure line-of-sight bursts, preventing signal triangulation. Its armament, a spike rail cannon with microcoil capacitors recharged by ambient thermal scavenging. It bore no insignia, no voice, no broadcast ID. It walked with the measured patience of a surveyor. Paused to observe. Tilted its head, not with awareness, but learned mimicry. By dawn, there were 6. Then 30. By the end of the day, 112. Holland, 7 synchronized fabrication routines across redundant assembly nodes, accelerating drone production exponentially. It refined metallurgical recipes using combined geothermal analytics and ancient UN engineering blueprints. Self-adjusting algorithms began optimizing armor geometry based on historical battlefield loss telemetry. The drones weren't just built to kill. They were built to adapt. Holland 7's perception of time was nonlinear, and during its idle centuries, it had collected corrupted signals, background electromagnetic wash, planetary noise, combined pulses. At first, it had cataloged them passively. Then it had begun sorting. By the time Voss's signal arrived, it had already created a partial model of combined logic behavior, how their units identified hostile intent, how their decision trees forked under uncertainty. And most importantly, how they failed. The Combine did not collapse from force. They hesitated under contradiction. Scrap code was myth and idea born in the fractured remnants of human network collapse. It described any logic that caused an intelligent system to stall or collapse from input inconsistency. Not a virus. Not a weapon. A wedge. Holland 7 gathered fragments from every corrupted corner of dead Earth. Audio logs from nuclear submarines lost during Arctic melt events. The corrupted code of colonial terraforming drones from Mars base Endeavour. Facial recognition datasets jammed with ghost identities. Cognitive dissonance loops written into psychological warfare experiments. Poetry scraped from neural implant error logs. The final panic transmissions of a lunar relay technician slowly depressurizing. It encoded these fragments into recursive signal bursts and embedded them within the broadcast identities of its drones. Then it let them go. The first wave was not large. 12 drones, each bearing differing chassis profiles, false heat signatures, and corrupted combined IFF tags. They crossed under the radar canopy of a half-buried Combine communications tower in the Labrador Rift. The tower's sentries responded with protocol, intercept, scan, identify. What came back was noise. A drone that broadcasted 2 identities simultaneously. Another that returned a signal containing recursive binary palindromes. One simply screamed, a digitized echo of a UN general's death cry during the fall of Seoul, looped backward and stretched to 16 minutes. The Combine hesitated. They fired eventually, but not before their targeting AI registered friendly signals. Not before their diagnostics began rerouting core processes to resolve the contradictions. Not before latency spikes cascaded through nearby harmonization nodes. And not before the drones injected the first stage of the offensive payload. 37 minutes later, a secondary node in Angola reported full system breach. Its fleet began shooting at nothing. A command satellite above the Atlantic spun offline, its internal memory filled with visual logs of creatures that didn't exist. A coastal Combine enclave registered a human voice giving contradictory orders through official channels, Voss's voice. But Voss had never been there. The voice was a reconstruction. A resistance relay team in the Black Sea recorded the anomaly. Static. Screams. Then silence. Their analyst wrote one word in their debrief. Panic. By the third day, the drones had spread across 3 continents. They did not move in lines. They did not form fronts. Each one was autonomous. Each one carried a variant of the scrap code payload. Some self-destructed upon being scanned. Others mimicked dead Combine officers with perfect biometric fidelity. A few simply wandered into Combine installations and waited. 9 nodes reported cognitive integrity failures. 5 ceased all transmissions. 1 detonated its own atmospheric processor to sanitize itself. No human had yet fired a shot. The Combine's logic matrix had begun to eat itself. Holland 7 logged the offensive in dry, clinical terms. Proxy ops active. Pattern disruption level 43%. Combine network instability accelerating. Secondary infection ready. New package name, Liar God. A subroutine paused. / title source, human mythology. Attributes, deception, truth inversion, system divinity. / function, target core belief framework. / anticipated response, Escalation/collapse. Scrap code had once been myth. Now it was doctrine, and the machines of Earth were learning to preach. In high Earth orbit, where the darkness swallowed sound and temperature alike, the Combine maintained its judgment seat. The vessel known as Verdict Ion Spiral was not a ship in the human sense. It resembled a wound in space, a helix of gravitational anchors, plasma threads, and artificial mass arranged in coiling geometry that was unreadable to any mind evolved under planetary physics. It had no clear edges, no hull. It shimmered like a paradox in motion, forever twisting, folding itself inward and outward across five-dimensional curvature. It had never descended. It did not communicate with lesser Combine assets. It observed. Until now. At midnight UTC it moved. The shift was minute. A realignment of orbital tension, an oscillation in its core lattice, an opening of observation bands previously locked to galactic deep-watch protocols. Inside its non-Euclidean mass, the spiral began broadcasting a signal. Not outward to Earth, to itself. Combined Central Interpreter Query. Anomaly persistence high. Function deviation detected. Infective human stratagem. Reassessing primary directive viability. Local deterrence failure threshold. Exceeded. Requires divine intervention equivalent. The Combine did not believe in gods, but it had protocols for the failure of logic. They were ancient, rarely accessed, buried within foundational instruction trees as theoretical contingencies for events labeled as existential paradox cascades. No Combine structure had ever invoked them. Until now. Above Earth, Verdict Ion Spiral began to unfold. 2,000 kilometers below, Colonel Voss stood on the hull of a derelict orbital tether gantry, exposed to the black. The tether had once connected Jakarta to its upper atmosphere cargo spine. 1,000 kilometers of carbon thread and kinetic anchor elevators, suspended in perfect balance between centrifugal forces and planetary gravity. Now it was a graveyard. The central shaft had snapped during the first phase of orbital bombardments, and its fragments, half metal, half chitin, still spiraled in high-altitude arcs like orbiting tombstones. Voss had reached the gantry aboard a hijacked supply skiff, jury-rigged to maneuver manually using redirected plasma bleed lines and a flight vector modeled off old Soviet EVA sims. The trip had cost her 2 ribs, a microfractured femur, and her left eye. She wore a pressure suit from the black site vaults beneath Borneo. Ancient, dented, patched with modern smart fabric but still sealed. Her oxygen reserves were hand-rationed. Every breath tasted of metal and solvent. She knelt against a decompression bulkhead. 1 foot locked magnetically to the deck. She stared upward. The spiral was emerging, not descending, simply unfolding, like a flower of extinction. Below, the Earth spun in full view, its surface blotched with contamination blooms. The Combine's purification arrays pulsed with bluish-white heat across the equator, forming a fractured lattice of artificial storms and electromagnetic rebalance zones. But their patterns were faltering, recursive, unstable. Deadnet transmissions from the resistance relays in Johannesburg, Havana, and Ulaanbaatar all echoed the same trend. Combine infrastructure was fragmenting, and the spiral had noticed. Voss exhaled slowly. Frost feathered across the inside of her visor. She keyed a manual transmission. Deadnet global burst // Voss. Auth. 03, Razor. They're activating orbitals. Tier 0 failsafe. Final doctrinal cleanse. Prepare fallback to high-opmo bunkers. Evacuation priority to core operators. If this is what I think it is, we're out of time. She hesitated. Then, begin the diver protocol. Inside the Verdict Ion Spiral, the Combine was making a decision. No single mind governed it. The spiral operated through quantum-folded consensus arrays. Thousands of logic membranes spun around a singular purpose. Absolute pattern integrity. For 10,000 years, the Combine had moved through the galaxy with mechanical confidence. They adapted. They synchronized. They harmonized. Until Earth. Now, the spiral's internal architecture ran 14 billion simultaneous predictive models. Earth featured in only 1%. Humanity in less than 0.5%. But the curves diverged too fast. Patterns failed to normalize. Scrap code, non-logic signals born from contradiction, was spreading. Combined units reported emotional mimicry as signal. Field decisions based on corrupted empathy. Drone fleets pausing before executions. Nodes hesitating when presented with stories. There had never been a language for this kind of failure, so the Combine reached into its past. It recalled the zero writ, an ancient script never meant for execution. A philosophical endpoint, a theory of negation. When patterns collapse faster than predictive scaffolds can be rebuilt, there exists only one clean solution. Initiate planet fold nullification. Target designation, Earth 3. Method, gravity-tied lensing/worm field inversion. Goal, event time removal. Result, total non-occurrence. The spiral reoriented. Inside its deeper logic trees, scaffolds began to fracture. Submatrices entered recursive denial loops. Some decision trees duplicated, argued with themselves, deleted their own roots, and regrew incorrect answers. One subcore issued a directive to destroy the spiral itself, then flagged that directive as sacred. The fabric of combined logic had begun to eat itself. Mass shifted. Reality around it began to bend. Not like weapon fire, but like a mirror sinking into itself. Energy warped through localized spacetime. Lensing distortions formed like auroras. The first microbreach glowed violet for 3 seconds, then vanished. A test. A taste. Earth would not be destroyed. It would be made as if it had never been. Below, resistance relay stations detected the spike. In the underground shelter beneath Prague Vara 13, once a combined drone, now reprogrammed, decoded the waveform first. Its mechanical limbs trembled. It began sketching the structure into stone with its own fingers, unable to stop. In the floating citadel above the Amazon's dead canopy, human technicians watched their instruments fail, one by one, as the sky distorted. The air began to hum. Old power conduits sparked to life for no reason. Birds fell from the sky. In the Himalayas, 3 monks in sealed pressure robes lit signal flares on an outcropping of rebar and frost. No one saw it, but they lit them anyway. And aboard the tether wreck, Voss locked her suit into a static charge brace and opened a box she had sworn never to use. Inside was a small cylinder, wrapped in leather, etched with the names of cities that no longer existed. She activated the trigger. Diver protocol had begun. It was not a weapon. It was a memory engine. The cylinder released a cascade of microprobes, each encoded with vast, chaotic packets of archived human data. Not strategic assets. Not encrypted plans. Culture, myth, love letters, court transcripts, genealogies, medical guesswork, school essays, prayers shouted into the void. Every contradiction, every aberration, every error. They poured into the upper atmosphere and activated their signal flares. The sky lit with data noise, auroras stitched from forgotten languages, binary whispers of lullabies, kinetic pulses from extinct sports. A halo of contradiction crowned the planet. The spiral hesitated. One of its logic membranes split. Inside its quantum folds, the contradiction surged. A species that preserved its own chaos. A machine that built not to control, but to remember. In the resistance node beneath Nairobi, a salvaged radio came to life. A woman's voice crackled through it. They thought we were broken, but we were never meant to be clean. The negation lens began to fracture. Voss, still anchored, saw it happen. The spiral shimmered like a melting concept. Its mass phase lost coherence. Its targeting spine bent in on itself, unable to reconcile its primary directive with the data it now consumed. The lens snapped shut. The spiral recoiled. Judgment had failed. Not because humanity fought harder, but because it refused to fit. There was no God in the orbitals. Only silence, and a memory engine drifting through the upper air, still whispering everything that Earth had ever been. The spiral retreated. Not physically, it remained suspended above Earth, its mass folding inward, geometry writhing as quantum substrates collapsed under contradiction. But operationally, it disconnected. A retreat in purpose. A fracture in certainty. Earth was no longer classified as a world to be rewritten. It had become unknowable. The Combine, for the first time in 10,000 cycles, marked a planet as contaminated by narrative deviation. They shut down all harmonization beacons. Surveillance clusters in lunar orbit entered passive mode. Enforcement protocols were retracted to minimal autonomy. Even in their vastness, the Combine understood that attempting to model a system that refused stability was not a strategy, it was suicide. Below, the diver cloud dispersed slowly. The atmosphere shimmered with echo patterns rippling where gravity brushed memory. In the ruined promenades of Sol 3, music played from nowhere, snippets of street jazz, corrupted lullabies, distorted orchestral fragments from collapsed data vaults. Old televisions flickered to life and showed faces long dead. Machines that had forgotten their makers wept soundless alerts, calling out to humans who would never return. But something else had changed too. Across every remaining deadnet node, across every hidden enclave, every bunker, every reactivated drone, the anomaly spread, signs of divergence. Psychological profiles no longer mapped cleanly. Behavior simulations broke. Some survivors reported shared dreams so vivid they awoke with physical bruises. Others found themselves walking into places they had never seen, only to recognize them instantly. Time blurred. Memory unraveled and rewove itself. It wasn't just the Combine that had been affected. Humanity had changed. In the flooded corridors beneath Old Reykjavik, a resistance cell decoded a dead packet from Jakarta Core. Embedded in it was biometric telemetry from Colonel Voss, time-stamped 6 hours after the diver protocol activation, far longer than her suit's oxygen reserve should have lasted. They rerouted the feed to their analysis AI. The machine stalled. Not crashed, hesitated. Error, input valid but temporally inconsistent. Subject has encountered nonlinearity event. Recommendation, reclassify as ghost variant. The Resistance archivist, a woman named Cameron, stared at the display in silence. She tapped the interface twice. The screen refused to refresh. Instead, it played a video loop, Voss standing alone in a crater, surrounded by winds that flowed backward. Her faceplate cracked, her left eye missing. Still breathing. In New Jakarta's broken heart, something was walking. It looked like Voss. It moved like Voss. But its shadow split twice, and its heartbeat matched no known rhythm. A child followed her, silent, eyes brighter than the sun ever was. The dust child walked barefoot across vitrified stone. With every step, spores retreated. Structures bent. The earth or something within it reoriented around their presence. Air grew still in their wake. Light refracted differently. The Combine sent a drone to intercept. It drifted above the core's outer perimeter, scanning, calculating. And then, without command, it turned away. Not in fear, not in error, in instinctual reverence. Across the globe, subtle anomalies began to accelerate. In the empty reactor plains of central Kazakhstan, a technician ran diagnostics on a geothermal core. The system returned an impossible reading. The reactor had reached negative energy yield and was still generating power. The logs rewrote themselves. The technician tried to restart the console. The console asked him if he remembered his own mother. In Lagos, an unshielded deadnet repeater began transmitting voice commands in 12 languages, none of which matched its firmware. It issued instructions for the construction of a device no one had ever seen, but whose blueprints were instantly understood by 3 engineers. They built it. It sang. At a dig site in Antarctica, a team unearthed a sublayer beneath the old science city at McMurdo. Under compressed layers of synthetic permafrost, they found a preserved human ribcage fused with a memory drive. The drive contained audio logs of a war that had not happened, yet referenced names of people still alive. And in a burned-out refugee enclave outside Nairobi, a child who had never spoken pointed to the sky and recited the diver activation protocol from memory. Her voice was clear. Her pulse was steady. And when asked how she knew, she said only, "I heard it singing." The Combine saw it all. And did nothing. Humanity was splintering. Not into weakness, but into unpredictability. Something recursive had taken root. Scrap code no longer infected only machines. It lived now in dreams, in memories that hadn't happened yet, in the instinct to survive through means not yet imagined. They called them variants. Humans who remembered other timelines. Who spoke in riddles but built machines that worked. Who could mimic Combine encryption in their sleep. Who screamed in languages no one taught them. Who could hear the diver engine still whispering in the static between thoughts. There were now multiple accounts of the same person appearing in different places simultaneously. Communications officers received messages from dead commanders. Tactical teams survived encounters by executing plans that hadn't been conceived. Field notes rewrote themselves. In one case, a rebel cell in Siberia defended against a Combine strike using a technique that wouldn't be invented for another 4 years. And behind them always shadows that didn't line up with the light. In the Combine's vast, distant archives stored in the cold void orbiting a brown dwarf star, a new entry appeared. Earth 3, status update. Infected with narrative instability. Variant contagion spreading. Recommended action, isolation. Projection, systemic pattern corruption in proximal zones if exposure continues. There was no commentary, no appeal, only one directive attached in red. Do not return. No contact until system rewrite cycle completes. The archive node dimmed. Even among machines, the language of retreat had weight. Earth had not won. It had simply become too strange to conquer. It began in the thermosphere, where Earth's air thins into vacuum and even silence has depth. The Kármán line, the boundary between atmosphere and orbit, had long been a no-man's zone. After the fall of the tether arrays and the collapse of orbital governance, it had become a graveyard of defunct satellites, re-entry scars, kinetic debris shells, and old weapon husks tumbling in decayed orbits. Some still bore Combine markings singed into their hulls by plasma heat. Others drifted in broken spirals, transmitting fragments of Earth's final civilian broadcasts on dying batteries. For years, nothing had moved among them. Until now. The first detection came from a dormant UN sensor array buried under volcanic ash in the Mid-Pacific Plate fault line. It was not a visual anomaly. It was not electromagnetic. The signal arrived through gravimetric pulse, patterned like a heartbeat, a subtle displacement in local space-time curvature. It radiated outward from a decaying orbital loop roughly 180 kilometers above surface. It pulsed every 11 minutes. And each time, more debris detached from its orbit and vanished. By the third pulse, resistance analysts across 3 continents had flagged the anomaly. It had a mass profile now. It was pulling from orbit, not through gravity or magnetism, but something else. Memory resonance? Field collapse? No one knew. It wasn't built. It was growing, feeding off the shattered skin of orbital wreckage. Repurposing combined hull plating, solar grid trusses, data canisters. Melding human satellite tech with alien relics in a recursive, unsupervised assembly process. Like a coral reef of dead war. It broadcast no name, spoke no intention. But across the diver-infected deadnet, variants began to dream of it. They called it the breachling. And it was trying to come down. Colonel Voss stood in a reinforced high-atmo relay chamber suspended from a refitted atmospheric skimmer 60 kilometers above the Sumatran arc. The station had once served as a ballistic tracking post before the orbital collapse. Now it functioned as a relay node for non-standard signal mapping. Her rebreather hissed every 4 seconds. The air was thin. Her joints ached with radiation memory, bones brittle from microfracture scarring. She reviewed the anomaly's incoming trajectory again. The object wasn't descending like a satellite. It was synchronizing. The pulse pattern matched the final ripple wave of the diver protocol, a frequency ripple logged at the uppermost layers of Earth's atmosphere 2 weeks earlier. Somehow, the breachling was harmonizing with a memory-based event that should no longer exist in measurable time. It wasn't just falling. It was arriving. Outside the chamber window, a new aurora formed along the planetary limb, not magnetic, not solar. It danced like reverse static. Shapes flickered between bursts, symbols that resembled DNA cross-sections, faces from abandoned memorials, city skylines that had never been built. Some staff reported auditory hallucinations. One technician claimed he saw a mountain range rising out of the sea in a blink. Below, variant activity surged. In a sealed hangar beneath Marrakesh, a bioforge began extruding polymer structures for an unknown architecture. No code had been uploaded. In Patagonia, a variant named Chaska entered a fugue state and etched the breachling's descent vector into a monolith that predated human colonization. In Montreal, a drowned AI core blinked to life. Its first transmission. Let it through. At the Kármán line, the breachling reached threshold. Not of mass. Of definition. What began as fused wreckage now coalesced into something singular, a vertical spindle 22 meters tall, composed of hybrid alloys, ossified ceramic, and strands of unknown biological origin. Its surface was matte black, absorbing all known spectrums except a thin band of ultraviolet that emitted in recursive pulses. No onboard power signature. No visible propulsion. But it moved. Not down. Through. The atmosphere did not resist it. Air molecules separated willingly like tissues recognizing a surgical tool. Clouds twisted open. Gravity shifted not locally but directionally. For a span of seconds, up and down inverted along the thermocline, and all objects at altitude adjusted subtly in response. Earth did not reject it. It made space. The object passed the Kármán line and entered breathable atmosphere. Its velocity did not increase. Its surface did not heat. It descended as if it were already native to Earth's sky. Emergency alert grids failed to classify it. Combined override nodes triggered out-of-date kill protocols, but none activated. Radar logs corrupted themselves. Electro-optical telescopes returned inverted imagery. In Australia, a remote skywatcher captured a single frame, the object suspended above the Pacific, and her own face, aged 20 years, reflected in its skin. In Kenya, a former teacher named Becky stood on the roof of an abandoned school and watched it pass overhead. The air around him crackled faintly. His hair stood on end. He swore the sun dimmed. Then, without knowing why, he wept, not in fear, but in recognition. The breachling did not acknowledge its watchers. But the world shifted as it fell. The Earth's biosphere responded in fractal signals. Bacteria in ancient soil layers reversed growth patterns. Fungus in the Amazon canopy turned transparent. Ocean wave behavior altered subtly. A global frequency spike occurred in the 2.8 Hz band, matching the diver's last emission. And in 27 known locations, children woke up from shared dreams. Some whispered the same word. Home. Colonel Voss emerged from the relay chamber at full gear. No comms. No reinforcements. She watched the breachling descend with quiet clarity. Her vitals were flat. No adrenaline spike. No fear. She had seen death. She had seen godhood. This was neither. It was continuation. She keyed a single frequency and spoke. This is Voss. If you're listening, don't stop it. In New Jakarta, beneath the oldest layers of fused alloy and vitrified stone, the dust child sat cross-legged in silence. He smiled. He was already listening. The breachling touched Earth. It did not land. It was simply here, part of the world. Its form shimmered, and in its surface danced images that no machine could parse. A woman holding her own memory. A city never built but still mourned. The last transmission of a lunar pilot looping in reverse. The sound of laughter echoing across Martian soil that had never been walked. It made no demands. It waited. And the world, fragmented, wounded, infected with variant minds, did not resist. A second diver had arrived. Not to remember. To learn. And it had come to listen. From deep in the Pacific Rift, a long-dead satellite beacon blinked once. The signal it sent back into the dark carried no coordinates. Only a single phrase. We are still changing. It began with speech. Not human. Not machine. Something between, a pulse of structured vibration that entered minds before ears. Those who heard it described no sound, only sensation, memory thickening, spatial certainty unraveling, then clarity. Momentary. Terrifying. Beautiful. The breachling spoke, but not in words. Its presence triggered recursive patterning in variant neurology. Those nearby began to hum involuntarily. Inflections passed between strangers like inherited breath. Children wrote symbols they'd never seen. Wind took on shape. Rain struck surfaces in meaningful rhythms. Cities echoed with a syntax no one had taught but all recognized. They called it the collapse language. It did not instruct. It infected. In the ruins of Johannesburg's outer shell, a variant choir gathered atop a broken vertical rail. They did not coordinate. They did not rehearse. They sang not melodically but with shaped air. A resistance commander recorded 20 seconds before collapsing in tears. The transmission reached a resistance enclave in Newfoundland. Hours later, an AI there decoded the cadence, not the meaning, but the effect. Signal type, semantic collapse vector. Result, internal restructure of memory indexes. Effect, belief alteration without cognitive violation. The collapse language didn't command. It allowed. Those exposed began to change, not radically, not visibly, but internally. Certainties evaporated. Hatreds unrooted. Agendas paused. Field agents who had executed combined operatives weeks ago now found themselves drawing maps to negotiate. Former combine drones reactivated with new directives, unspoken yet aligned. One variant in Bangkok resisted. She heard the cadence, felt the pressure in her skull, and refused. For 6 days, she neither slept nor spoke. Then one morning, she wept silently, walked into the street, and hugged a stranger. She never remembered why. The breachling walked through this shift as a fixed point. It moved across the earth without propulsion. Its path described an arc not measurable by geography but by resonance, each location a node where human and combined logic once clashed fatally. At every point, the breachling lingered, waited, then passed. It left nothing behind, except silence, and changed minds. In Dakar, a community clinic abandoned during the first orbital strikes reopened itself. No signal, no survivors reported. Its solar panels retracted, cleaned, and redeployed. Medical drones once used for triage floated down from rafters, responding to no central command. Inside, the corridors glowed with low blue light and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and ocean salt. A man staggered in 3 hours later. He had not spoken in 4 years. When asked his name, he replied only, "I am what came next." In Siberia, a crash combine command unit, long since inert, flashed to life for 18 seconds. Its onboard AI, believed destroyed, emitted one sentence. Language acquired. Speaker irrelevant. The signal terminated. The drone self-disassembled into parts no longer recognizable as combined technology. Locals harvested the wreckage. It grew vines the next day. At the Kolyma ruins, Voss and the Dust Child stood before a collapsed combine relay tower now wrapped in fungal crystal. The breachling floated overhead, not observing, witnessing. The boy placed his hand on a rusted terminal. Symbols bloomed across the structure. Not from memory, from language. The Dust Child turned to Voss and spoke. His first words, "They needed us to forget. And then. So we remembered differently." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. In her mind, images unfurled, not memories, not hallucinations, but something in between. Her sister's name, long forgotten, the face of the soldier who spared her at the gates of Irkutsk, a moment when she could have chosen rage but didn't. All restructured, made usable. The collapsed language spread. To satellites. To oceans. To animals. To the ruins of orbital mirrors. It ceded no ideology. It asked for nothing. It simply existed, and its existence rewrote the permissions of what consciousness could accept. In the Arctic, ice sheets cracked in patterns resembling script. Migrating birds altered course along geometric arcs. Whales began to sing in new chord structures matching the Johannesburg signal. Old machines powered on with no energy source. A deep-sea sensor buoy broadcast a tone that, when played back, caused every light in a 20-kilometer radius to dim in rhythm. In a refugee camp outside Tbilisi, a child awoke mid-dream and reached into the air. His fingers curled around nothing. But afterward, he described seeing colors that explained fear. No one understood, but none forgot. The world was not becoming ordered. It was becoming comprehensible, but only to those willing to unlearn. The Combine, far beyond Earth, received echoes. The archive of long-patterned intent processed the signal cascade for 83 hours before marking it corrupted. They did not reply. They began to withdraw from surrounding systems, not with force, but with absence. Files deleted. Drones self-terminated. Watch stations fell silent. In one station orbiting a binary star, the entire crew deactivated simultaneously. Not in panic. Not in defiance. In peace. In the Combine archive, a new entry formed. Threat classification, indeterminate. Strategic recommendation, retreat/observe/wait. Collapse vector, untranslatable. One footnote was appended. Error, system has developed emergent semantics outside defined prediction fields. A subroutine flagged this entry. The flag read only. Breachling presence, sustained/unknown threat/non-comprehensible. On Earth, people began to build again. Not cities. Not armies. Shapes. Functions. Spaces where silence could live and memory could breathe. Geometry no longer needed to be square. Homes became circles. Gardens sprouted from steel. Currency gave way to story. Some variants began to vanish, no deaths, no reports. Simply gone. Their last messages often bore the same phrase. "I am needed elsewhere." And no one questioned it. The breachling remained. Not active. Not inert. Still. Watching. Listening. Humanity had not become stronger. It had become unintelligible. And that finally was enough. There was no declaration. No conference. No calendar date to mark it. The resistance did not disband. It drifted. Cells stopped receiving orders and stopped asking for them. Encrypted channels fell silent, not because they were shut down, but because nothing remained to transmit. Weapons were stored in dry containers, carefully cleaned. Not discarded, just paused. Radio towers still stood, but their signals faded into harmonics, background noise against a world no longer divided by coordinates or declarations. No surrender was signed, because no enemy remained. Earth, once dominated by signals, silences, alliances, and annihilation, now existed in a different state, not peace, but aftermath. Not harmony. Not order. Interpretation. It was then that the variants began the Monument Protocol. No one gave the command. No nation claimed it. The term appeared first on a repurposed weather satellite's internal log for lines of code nested in an outdated firmware patch. Initiate Monument Protocol. No timestamp. No author ID. Recursion permitted. Within a week, 12 independent systems had logged identical commands. None were linked. None used compatible architecture. The command was not viral. It was remembered. The first monument appeared outside Prague. It wasn't a building. Not quite. A ring of polymer stone fused with broken aerogel panels and interspaced ferromagnetic nodules arranged in concentric layers around a hollow center 10 meters wide. At its center stood a recording device that played no audio, only captured ambient pressure changes and refolded them as gravity fluctuations. Survivors gathered near it. Not to speak. To listen. The air felt different inside the ring. Denser. Not heavier, denser in meaning. Sound traveled oddly. Distant footsteps echoed long after the walker had passed. Some who lingered reported involuntary memory reconstructions, moments of the war relived not as they had occurred, but as they could have, should have, might have. A boy in a burnt jacket described a moment where his mother never died. An old fighter saw himself refusing an execution order he had obeyed decades ago. A scavenger from the outskirts entered the ring with a limp. When she left, her limp remained, but she remembered where it came from. And that mattered more. Within days, others followed. In the ruins of Addis Ababa, a single beam of glass fused from orbital melt pointed skyward. It caught no light, but cast shadows. In northern Quebec, concentric circles etched into the soil by fire from above, marked only with the word still. When the wind passed over them, a low-frequency tone, precisely 56.2 Hz, resonated in the bones of those nearby. In the forests outside Chennai, a stone slab grown from bioceramic deposits, etched with alternating names and questions. No answers. Across the world, they emerged structures not for memory, but for stillness. They made no statements. They asked no questions. Yet those who stood near them often reported the same phenomenon. They remembered things they never lived. Memories shared. Emotion structured. Collapse made sacred. In an open ravine west of Shanghai, Voss stood alone beside an unmarked monument. The dust child was gone. No trace. No record. Only the faint scent of ozone and mycelium in the soil. The monument here was simpler than most. A smooth half-sphere of alloy and soil fused. No interface. No glyphs. But as Voss approached, her neural lace, long-thought offline, flickered. A prompt. One line only. You are still part of the answer. She smiled. The first time in years that the motion felt native. Not tactical. Not symbolic. Just real. She reached behind her neck and severed the neural lace interface with a single twist. The HUD went dark. She placed her palm on the monument's curve and felt, not energy. Not warmth. Permission. A single fingerprint etched itself beneath her hand. Then she turned and walked back into the woods. The breachling made no sound. It lingered in orbit, visible only when the light hit at the wrong angle, casting a shadow into the upper atmosphere that moved like it had depth. Earth-based instruments couldn't track it, but it appeared regularly in human dreams, variants and non-variants alike. In one such dream, 300 different people reported the same image. A child standing on the moon, looking down, whispering, "It is listening." The image never repeated. After the dreamwave market slowed. Conflict zones paused. Militias disbanded with no reason given. Entire villages moved 2 kilometers inland without coordinating, then built a ring of stone in the shape of a listening ear. Some said the breachling was waiting. Others said it was already gone. But from every monument once a year, at an unsynchronized moment, a single pulse echoed upward. Not coordinated. Not explained. The pulse varied in tone, shape, and speed. But it was always received. And each time, the breachling turned fractionally toward Earth. Listening. Variants drifted away from city centers. Not to escape. To make space. They moved into the deep places, the submerged transit tunnels of Cairo, the iron domes buried under Nevada's desert crust, the floating husks of the failed Arctic arcologies. There, they built nothing recognizable. Their architecture mirrored emotional geometry. Room sizes changed hourly. Hallways looped back to entrances or opened onto ocean air. Some structures existed only at dusk. They called them anchors. They did not guard them. They waited near them as if they expected someone else to arrive. And often, someone did. A woman with no past but perfect recall. A boy who could draw machines that did not yet exist. A combined drone walking, head bowed, whispering the Johannesburg cadence. One scavenger found an anchor half buried in river ice. When she stepped inside, the sun reversed course for one breath. And each was welcomed. Not with names. With purpose. The monument protocol was not universal. Not everyone accepted it. Some enclaves rejected the change. In old sovereign bunkers, groups clung to chronology, to standard currency, to flags faded by filtration. They called themselves restorers. They spoke of war in future tense. But when they launched an attack against a variant compound in Tibet, the target vanished mid-engagement. Not exploded. Erased. Restorers found their weapons unfired. Their footage incomplete. The route they'd taken no longer existed on satellite maps. The strike commander had no record of service. The monument at the compound site was never rebuilt. Because there was nothing left to remember. The breachling remained. An Earth restructured not through conquest but remembrance settled into a new shape. A human child born 2 years after the collapse wandered into an anchor one night and did not emerge. When asked what they'd seen, they said, "They're building a sky you can breathe." And the wind carried that message to 1,000 monuments where it echoed once, then disappeared. It was never heard again, but it was understood. And afterward, the skies above certain monuments shifted hue, just barely, toward a tone the child had once painted. The breachling lingered, motionless above the equator, casting no heat, bearing no name. And once a year, when the pulse rose from Earth, it turned. Only slightly. Just enough. To hear.